And we took our top dogs to talk about hiring today, and we thought you all would be willing to share some of your failures and mistakes when it came to hiring. Are you willing to be vulnerable with us today?
Yeah.
I don't think you meant top dogs. I think you meant we took the people that had the most stories to tell.
Which is you.
Armando's made a lot of mistakes.
He's seen some.
I don't like that you look straight at me. You look straight at me when you said
it's a personal attack. Well, we have some would say a complicated and long hiring process here at Ramsey, and it's for a very good reason. We are notoriously known for 12 components for a good hire, and we won't go through all of those today, but there's a reason each one of those 12 exists, and it comes from mistakes that we've made over 30 years, many of them, Dave, in the early days, figuring this out. And I wanted you guys to share some of those stories that you've experienced.
I'll jump in and say that one of my biggest mistakes that I had personally whenever I first started leading people years ago was I remember specifically having a couple that was moving from the West Coast, and we all got together and we're talking, and we had a dinner together, and I picked up on the fact that he was way more excited than she was, but really didn't give an opportunity for her to talk about, his wife to really talk about what it was going to be like. It didn't dive into the fact that they were moving with their first child on the way away from all their family.
Yeah, and Jeremy, that was during the spousal, wasn't it? That's when you picked it up?
Yep, absolutely. Yeah. And I learned a lot that day because sure enough, they got here, they're about 6 months in and miserable. Had no plan of how to connect. And it was such a brutal experience. And you felt so bad for them. And I realized, man, we could have uncovered that. I could have asked some questions because they didn't know. And the guy was just excited. And she was trying to follow his lead. But really, I learned a ton from that experience.
Yeah.
Honestly, Jeremy, like in the last year, I think I've made that mistake probably 3 or 4 times. I've made
Not digging in?
That's right. Or they moved back home. They left, within 18 months and they moved back home. So that we hired them from out of town. And they just really weren't committed to the move in various ways. So, they had fine reasons for leaving, but ultimately what it was they weren't committed to the move. They didn't plug in community. They didn't find community, or they didn't put enough intentionality in the community. They didn't really plant their roots here in Nashville. And so that caused them to ultimately go back. And typically when a big life event happens in someone's life too, it really shakes them and they lean back on the people they trust, whether they need help with childcare or whether they just need good friends rallying around them. And so, man, that's one thing I've been hitting really hard in the interview process is, hey, what are you going to do to find community? What is childcare going to look like for you? Are you excited about this town and the culture, the unique culture that Nashville has, or whatever town you're from, for those listening?
That's good. And the spousal dinner, that's one of the final pieces of the interview process.
Right.
And like you're saying, it's important that we have that. And people go, that's weird. Why do you have to bring my wife into this, man, or my husband? But it's very important to get the spouse on board because your job affects your family and affects your life. And so it's a super important piece of the process. And even then, you have to dig in.
Yeah, and people think that of a spotlight on their spouse, like trying to dive into skill. And that's not what that's like at all. But giving them the opportunity to talk to us is so big.
No, we're not interviewing the spouse and the spousal. Exactly. It's more of an opportunity for us just to lay out like, hey, here's who we are. What questions do you have? We want to involve you in the process. We're not interviewing the spouse.
I'll tell you, it's so cool to see the alignment when they're both excited, not only about the company that the spouse is about to join, but also the city they're moving to if there's a move involved, and the intentionality. How are you going to make friends? Like, have they made friends before, or have they lived in the same town for a long time? So it sounds silly, but those are the simple things that people don't think about sometimes.
Yeah, getting plugged into a community as an adult is hard. Deloney talks about this all the time. Making friends is hard. Finding people to babysit your kids is hard. Finding, being comfortable with the school districts and all that. Those are important. They matter so much to families.
So on top of the spousal, part of this is, can they do the job? And sometimes that's hard to decipher in the interview process, right? Has that been a pain point for you guys as you've been interviewing?
It's been a pain point for me. So Daniel said I've made a lot of mistakes earlier, and so this is true.
That was a joke. I probably made more.
Now, some of the worst hiring mistakes I've made is when we were not clear about what we wanted that person to do when they got here, because that person didn't know, right? So they didn't know exactly what was going to be expected of them. And then typically less than a year, they realize, I can't do the job you hired me to do, or we realize you can't do the job we hired you to do. So there's a little bit of both sides own it, right? So on our side, we own, did we actually do a good job of assessing their skills, right? Did we think they could actually do it? On the other side, it's on the candidate being able to opt out if needed, right? Being able to say, I can't do this. I can't do what you would need for this role.
I remember a time where we hired somebody intentionally. We knew that they didn't have the skills to do the job, but they were close. They had some experience that actually would line up. And our commitment originally was that that leader who hired that person would dive in and spend a lot of time helping to catch that person up. And then that leader ended up getting so busy that they never had time. So when that person ended up leaving, they said they were super frustrated because, hey, I signed up knowing I couldn't do this, but I never felt like I had the support along the way. Those are the types of things that for us who do this all the time, it's super frustrating because going into it, but we also have to recognize that we have a series of things that we have to commit to and then deliver as well.
Mm-hmm. There was one time I was interviewing someone. They were a leader, actually. They were leading part of our team and really excited. This person was so nice. They were sociable. They were fun. And when they got in the door, they could not do the job. They just didn't have the ability to really drive the lane and lead the team the way they thought they could. They may have had success at other places, and they could talk the talk, but they didn't have the self-awareness of what it was going to take to pull off. And so I truly believe that they thought they had what it took, but when they got here, they definitely realized they didn't, and that was hard. It was probably 9 months before we ended up parting ways, and it was just hard for everyone involved. Love the guy, he was great, but he wasn't great at the job, and so the team suffered. His stress was way too high, and so it was a lose-lose. And I wish on the front end I would have done a better job of really digging in, giving more specific examples of what the job entails, and giving him scenarios to see, hey, how would you do this or how would you do that, and seeing how he responds. That would have saved his family and us and our team so much pain, so much trouble.
Yeah. I don't know about you, Daniel, but those are some of the hardest exits for me to do, is because we could have perhaps, by digging deeper, by giving scenarios, by role-playing some of the actual work, we might have been able to prevent that.
Exactly.
I think that's also one of the reasons we're so intentional now about doing a separate skills interview, where it's a group of people, and oftentimes it's not a leader now. We're talking about a senior level person who's actually a maker in that role is sitting there helping to assess their skill. I think that's so huge because that gives the opportunity to not feel like you have to cover a whole bunch of different things at once. I'm going to spend this hour and just dive straight into their skill.
Yeah. Someone from HR interviewing a developer, they may not know the ins and outs of code naturally. So to have someone who does understand code sit with them and assess that can avoid a whole lot of pain down the road.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
That's huge. So as part of all of these mistakes, hopefully over time you get better and you make less of them and you make better hiring decisions, but that also means it takes longer. So, a lot of leaders feel like there's a sunk cost fallacy. Well, it took so long to hire them. Now I don't want to get rid of this person. How do you deal with that level of kind of regret, or we spent so much time in this and now it's all wasted?
Yeah. I think the worst part about hiring someone that can't do the job is keeping someone that can't do the job.
That's even more expensive.
Yeah. In the long run, that costs you a lot more, right? The team can see, hey, you brought this person in and they can't really do it. And the longer you keep them, it just degrades everyone involved.
Have there been moments recently where you guys have caught something midway because of these principles and values we have around hiring, where you went, okay, they took the personality assessment, or we saw the references and we had to cut it?
We don't make decisions based off of just that personality. We use the DISC. That's used as a tool, but we never use that for only the hiring purposes.
It's a multifaceted decision.
Right. That's something to help go alongside as we're talking to somebody about it. But all the time, we have intentionality around each step of the process. And when you know what you're going to cover and it builds off of something else, we've recently rolled out a new interview process that does that more than ever before, that requires every leader to prepare ahead of time, we give them actually structured guides, interview guides, and then also require them to fill out evaluations. So that way it is building on each other through the whole thing. That helps eliminate a lot of redundancy, because one of the biggest things that candidates walking through any hiring process get frustrated with is they say things like, well, I had the same interview over and over and over. You asked me the same thing that this person did. We didn't uncover anything new if you asked the same question, unless there's a specific reason for it. But normally it's because you just didn't know there wasn't a process. So us changing our process and laying it out, you can have a lot of steps, but that doesn't mean it has to take a long time.
And we don't cut out the steps. So we keep the same number of steps. The process is there for a reason, right? And so it helps us hire the best quality people. And when you start shortchanging the process, you end up with mistakes.
Right.
You can go faster through a process if you're more intentional. So just because the process has a lot of steps doesn't mean it goes so slow. You know, if we have a candidate that we're really excited about and it seems like a slam dunk, we don't skip steps. We just speed it up and say, hey guys, let's make this a priority. Let's get the right people in the interview process and let's line up that schedule so we make it happen quickly. So we do make hires quickly oftentimes. It's for the ones that that we have some yellow flags or some things we need to really dig into and lean into more, that the process we spend more time on each step.
Yeah, and Daniel, that's a great point. So thanks for making that point, because we can move faster. And when it's a referral and we already know something about him, someone's worked side by side with that person and can speak on their behalf to the work they've done, that goes a lot faster, right? Like we have someone internally that can say, oh, I know how they work. I know how they deal with other colleagues. I know how they collaborate. I know how so all of those things helps us to speed up the process.
I've heard Dave Ramsey say, marriage is grand, divorce is 50 grand. And I feel like the same applies in hiring. When you go, hiring's expensive, but when you hire the wrong person, it can be even more expensive. As we know, onboarding and all the time spent and all the leaders and team involved. And so we want to do this with a lot of intentionality to avoid these mistakes, because it's way more expensive than going, well, I needed a warm body in the door. Let's just get someone in. We'll deal with it later. That can be a huge problem.
Yep, agreed.
I think I'll give Daniel a shout out here, because on Monday with our recruiting team, we were talking about pain points and just uncovering what are problems. And one of the things is a lot of hiring leaders at a certain level, the higher they get, sometimes they're busy and it's hard to get on their calendar for schedules, or it's hard to get feedback. And one of the two names that they said were the best in the building was Daniel Ramsey and Herb Jenkins. They both happen to be board members too.
I didn't know I had that reputation.
You didn't know, but it was
my
good.
ego just grew a little
I
bit.
know. Don't let him do that. Don't do that. But I think that it's because they're very intentional of knowing their business and knowing the impact that it can have. And so they make themselves available and also have a high level of understanding, why are we hiring this position? If you know that and you know the impact, then you really are motivated to hire and to move through the process quickly.
Well, one of the top character qualities I see in Daniel is discernment. And I think that is one of the key things you have to have in the interview process, is discerning where the yellow flag, green flags, red flags are, where to dig in and where to move on. And that can be a huge part of this process. It's not something you can necessarily just learn quickly.
Hey, can I take a stand on something?
Please.
On that note, if you're trying to discern someone, look into, is this a good fit, and really get a strong feel, it is almost impossible to do that virtually. Get them in the office, see them face to face, look them in the eyes. If at all possible, you have got to do that, because doing interviews only over the computer is just, there's so much fakeness that can be lost and missed. But if you're trying to discern if they're the right fit and really going to be part of your culture, look at them in the eyes, watch the way they react to their questions, see how they interact with your team when you bring them into your office.
You can pick up on so many nonverbal cues, right? To your point, you can pick up on things. Are they excited? Are they at the edge of their seat, right? Are they leaning back? So all of those things that can be hidden in a Zoom.
Yeah, so we interview a lot of people from out of state or not in Nashville, and we do our initial calls over the phone or over Zoom, but we always have people come in person to be at our office before we make any decision.
You know, we actually recently changed our initial HR screen from being a phone screen to Zoom, because I think there's different levels up. From a phone to Zoom,
it's
better.
Read it.
It's better. And then go in person. But any opportunity that we have to bring on site, and this specifically for the people who aren't around.
The local people, you know, I always have a strong preference that we do as few phone calls as possible, but as many, like, get them in the office.
Agreed.
Let's sit down. Let's talk to them. If they really care this much about working here, they're going to make time in their schedule. And you know I care about hiring them too, so I'm going to make time as well.
So based on all of your failures, maybe in the past with hiring mistakes, what's the top tip each of you would give a leader out there who's struggling to find the right people with the right fit, culture fit, skills fit, all of that?
In today's day and age, I think it'll go against the norm, but I would say take your time. Don't rush it. Take your time.
It's good.
I would say know specifically what it is that you the characteristics and the skills, what you want to hire. Do you know what winning looks like? Because if you don't know what that looks like, you'll miss an opportunity when you're talking to somebody. You'll have somebody who's fantastic for it and you won't even know.
Yeah.
Or you'll think they're awesome, but you never invested the time to know the skill and what you're looking for. So you don't know that that didn't line up.
And that's one of the keys of creating KRAs, which is part of our hiring process.
You have to have that
key results areas.
solid job description, KRAs built out.
That's right. The piece of advice I would give is don't let your desperation, your need for someone in the role to help you overlook red flags. If you see a red flag, you need to deal with it and really dig into it. Don't let your desperation get in the way of you making a bad hire.
So much wisdom here, guys. Loved having you on. Love the way you guys intentionally are hiring the right people so that we can have the impact we need to have. Thank you guys so much.
Thanks, George.
Thanks for having us.